In mid-January, Taiwan had national elections. The country voted not just for the president, but also for the lawmakers. 113 people were chosen, and they took office on February 1st. Their first order of business was choosing the legislative speaker, the person who represents and runs the entire legislative yuan. The man that won that post was Han Kuo-yu of the main opposition KMT. He's a somewhat controversial figure.
我相信广大的台湾人民期待一个认真问政、合作团结的立法院，心心念念都是为台湾老百姓来谋福利。
Now, before we get into Han's history, let's talk about what the legislative speaker's role is. Unlike the US, which has both the House and the Senate, Taiwan only has one body, and the legislative speaker represents that body. Basically, the speaker is in charge of an entire branch of government. Their main duties are procedural, making sure that everything that the legislature does goes according to plan and goes smoothly. Part of that is making sure that different parties talk to each other. If for some reason there's some disagreement between parties in the legislature, it's the speaker's job to act as a go-between and make sure that they can communicate. Now, with Han elected as speaker, they also chose Johnny Zhang as the deputy speaker, and he's also from that same party, the KMT. They've both vowed to keep a close eye on President-elect Lai Ching-te when he takes office in May. But who is Han Kuo-yu, and why is he drawing so much attention? Well, here's his colorful past.
小老鹰在飞，下面有野狐狸在赶，切记，一言一行，各方面一定要谨慎。
Han Kuo-yu. He's the boisterous politician who's been grabbing national headlines for decades. He's now landed his most influential role yet. The Kuomintang politician has survived scandals, a mayoral recall, and a spectacular presidential election loss to Tsai Ing-wen in 2020. Now he will serve as Taiwan's legislative speaker.
It will be very interesting to see how this pans out. Han, he's a very affable and charismatic man. He has a very solid support base. Many in the KMT are very fond of him. On the other hand, he has a reputation for not being necessarily very diplomatic, speaking off the cuff and making gaffes, which may make it a little bit harder for him to maintain the neutrality and the diplomatic nature of the position of Speaker of the Legislature.
Han's opening political stint was as a lawmaker in 1992, in the very chamber he will now head. This is when he first entered the spotlight after assaulting then-fellow lawmaker Chen Shui-bian, hospitalizing the future president. After laying low for years, Han re-emerged in 2018 to run for Kaohsiung city mayor, in a race seen as a surefire win for rival party, the DPP.
民进党也不是高雄人的爸爸，为什么每一次要投他？人民才是政党的爸爸。
In a shock victory, Han landed the job with lofty economic promises. Just 3 months later, he shifted gear to bid for Taiwan's top office against incumbent President Tsai Ing-wen, but he lost, and by a large margin. Then another blow. Kaohsiung residents voted Han out as mayor, the first in Taiwan's democratic history. Analysts back then said it would be hard for the KMT to bounce back.
国民党不管怎么讲，你们需要去找另外一个 superstar。今天输掉了，被罢免掉了。在这种状况之下，国民党要在废墟上面呢重新站起来，确确实实是不容易的。
Today, the opposition party is still fighting to stay relevant after losing the presidential race to give the ruling DPP a historic third straight term in office, while a third reformist party continues to gain influence. But the KMT's role in local politics is far from over, having won the most seats in the country's legislature, giving it the speakership.
Since the legislature is in charge of pushing through all sorts of laws, including the government's budget, that makes the position of speaker extremely important. And it's even more important this time because no one party holds a clear majority in the legislature.
不管是预算的通过、 法规的通过，甚至是所谓的独立机关的人事同意权的一些通过，所以立法院当然我们认为非常的重要。不过我觉得从另外一个角度来说，民主本来就不是谈效率哦，其实民主在谈的还是这些过程当中的公平正义的这些程序。过去也许过半的政党会稍微觉得会减少跟社会大众来沟通，我认为这个也许也是另外一个机会，是逼迫任何的政党，他提出了这些诉求，必须要对外来清楚论述，想办法要获得舆论的支持。
Now, on paper, the legislative speaker's role is purely internal. It has no official foreign relations duties. But in the last few years, there have been more and more foreign delegations coming to Taiwan, and many of them do go visit the legislature, and that means meeting with the legislative speaker. With Han now in that position, he's definitely going to meet more international delegations, but some have questioned his experience in that regard. This is Chen Fangyu, a political science professor from Taiwan's Suzhou University.
Han Kuo-yu had a very notorious records on the foreign visitors. For example, when he served as the Kaohsiung city mayor, several times that he was late to the events that hosting the visiting scholars and visiting foreign visitors. I'm also worried about Han Kuo-yu's cross-strait relations policies as well, because when he was running for the Kaohsiung city mayor and also running for the president, one of the major policy is that he wants to promote the openness to China, especially open to China's economic market. Also, he once has visited Hong Kong, and to see the Chinese officials there, and that move was highly criticized by many people, because it is not proper for a Taiwanese official to see Chinese officials there, because it's China has ambitions over Taiwan, and also China is showing the big hand controlling Hong Kong.
In her 8 years in office, President Tsai Ing-wen has had the luxury of her party being in charge of both the executive branch and the legislative branch of government. Her successor, Lai Ching-te, is likely going to have a somewhat harder time of it with the KMT at the helm.